In the last section, we logged out the summary that we got back from an individual campaign. So this right here is supposed to be the minimum contribution. I think that we've got the number of requests, the number of something else, and then the address of the person who created the original campaign, or essentially the manager. Notice how this object right here has keys of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you might look at this and think that it's kind of like an array of sorts. However, it's not an array. It is in fact an object. Anytime that we call a function from a contract that returns multiple values, we get back this result object right here. And it looks like it is an array, but it is in fact an object. So now that we've got this data back, let's flip back over to our component and we're going to finish off the getInitialProps function. In particular, we want to make sure that we take all those properties that were just returned on the summary object right here and make sure that we return them inside this object. So I'm going to remove the console log. And then you might be thinking, okay, well, let's just pass that entire object in there. But remember, this summary object has these different properties, which mean completely different things. So I think that maybe rather than passing through the entire summary object, we should label every property on here and pass them as individual props down into our component. So in other words, rather than just passing that entire object through, I kind of want to print out the, or pass down the specifically minimum contribution property, and like the owner property and the balance and the approver's count and all that kind of stuff. So I want to pass those down as individual props rather than this entire big object. The reason I want to do that inside of getInitialProps right here is that, we've got this object right here and it doesn't very clearly label the purpose of every one of those return values. Like we are seeing right now 0 as minimum contribution. So I kind of want to just process this object right now and label each of these fields rather than have to deal with it later on inside of the component itself. Okay, so let's label each of these. First off, we have the minimum contribution, and that's going to be coming from the 0 property of that summary object. So even though I just said this is an object and not an array, it's still going to look like we are accessing it as though it were an array. So to get access to that 0 property, we could write summary at 0. And that will give us this first result right here. And then we can repeat that same process for all the other keys on the object as well. Now, I don't personally remember which of these properties right here were which, right? They're all coming up as 0. So we're actually going to have to go back to our contract and look at the order of values that we had returned from it to figure out which of these zeros right here are supposed to be what. So back inside of our contract file, it looks like the second return value is the balance, and then the number of requests, and then the approver's count. So back over here, we'll do the balance is going to be summary at 1. We're going to do requests count will be summary at 2. Approver's count will be summary at 3. And then finally, the last one is a little bit more obvious. This is the address of our manager. So we'll say manager is summary at 4, like so. So again, we're taking care of this kind of translation layer right here in our getInitialProps function so that later on inside the actual component methods, we don't have to say like summary at 0 and remember, oh yeah, this is supposed to be my minimum contribution or anything like that. We're just returning these very well-labeled properties from the getInitialProps function. So when we eventually make use of these inside the component methods, we can just say this.props.balance or this.props.manager, as opposed to having to continue to reference this kind of nasty summary object. All right, I think I've kind of drilled home that point well enough at this point. So let's take a break here. We're going to come back in the next video, and we're going to start getting all these different properties to display really nicely on our campaign show component.